Hello, third service. I'm going to take a minute and read from There's No Such Thing as a Dragon. Billy Bixby was rather surprised when he woke up one morning and found a dragon in his room. It was a small kind of dragon, about the size of a kitten. The dragon wagged its tail happily when Billy patted it on the head. Billy went downstairs to tell his mother. She said, "There's no such thing as a dragon." And she said it like she meant it. Billy went back to his room and began to dress. The dragon came close to Billy and wagged its tail. But Billy didn't pat it. If there's no such thing as a dragon, it's silly to pat it on the head. Billy washed his face and hands and went down to breakfast. The dragon went along too. It was bigger now, almost the size of a dog. Billy sat down at the table. The dragon sat down on the table. This sort of thing was not usually permitted, but there wasn't much Billy's mother could do, since she had already said there's no such thing as a dragon. And if there's no such thing as a dragon, you can't tell it to get down off the table. Mother made some pancakes for Billy, but the dragon ate all of them. Mother made some more too, but the dragon ate those too. Mother kept making pancakes until she ran out of batter. Billy only got one pancake, but he said that's all he really wanted anyway. Billy went upstairs to brush his teeth. Mother started clearing the table. The dragon, who was quite as big as Mother by this time, made himself comfortable on the hallway rug and went to sleep. By the time Billy came back downstairs, the dragon had grown so much he'd filled the hallway. Billy had to go around by way of the living room to get to where his mother was. "I didn't know dragons grew so fast," said Billy. "There's no such thing as a dragon," said his mother. Cleaning the downstairs took Mother all morning, and having to climb in and out of windows to get from room to room. By noon, the dragon had filled the house. Its head hung out the front door, its tail out the back door, and there wasn't room in the house that didn't have some part of the dragon in it. When the dragon awoke from his nap, he was hungry, and a bakery truck went by. The smell of fresh bread was more than the dragon could resist, so the dragon ran down the street after the bakery truck. And the house, of course, went along too, like a shell on a snail. The mailman was just coming up the path with some mail for the Bixbys when their house rushed past him and headed down the street. He chased the Bixby's house for a few blocks, but he couldn't catch it. When Mr. Bixby came home for lunch, the first thing he noticed was that the house was gone. Luckily, one of the neighbors was able to tell him which way it went. Mr. Bixby got in his car, went looking for the house. He studied all the houses, and finally, he saw one that looked familiar. Billy and Mrs. Bixby were waving from the upstairs window. Mr. Bixby climbed over the dragon's head onto the front porch and through the upstairs window. "How did this happen?" Mr. Bixby asked. Billy said, "It was the dragon." And his mother started to say, "There's no such thing." And Billy said, "Yes, there is. There is such thing as a dragon. It's a very big dragon." And Billy patted it on the head. The dragon wagged its tail happily. Then, even faster than it had grown, the dragon started getting smaller again. And soon it was kitten size, just like it started. "I don't mind dragons this size," said Mother. "Why did it have to grow so big?" "I'm not sure," said Billy, "but I think it just wanted to be noticed." So this morning, I'm here to talk to you about depression. This subject is not one to be taken lightly, and I've really tried to find ways to insert some humor or to lighten it up a little bit so that it would be more comfortable for you guys. But the truth is, this is not a comfortable topic. It's a heavy subject. And so if you will, just bear with me, because I believe that there is hard stuff in life, but there's also hope. And so I'm going to circle back around to the hope at the end. So we're going to walk through before depression starts, when depression hits, and then our response to depression. So this is something that I often show my clients when we first sit down together. And it's a map, I believe, of what the human experience is like. And so if you'll look up here at the top, we've got this true, pure version of ourselves. So you can see the characteristics listed up here. There's clarity, there's creativity, there's courage, there's curiosity, there's being centered, there's calmness, there's consistency, there's confidence, compassion, and connectedness. And when I think about these characteristics, children come to mind, right? This is the purest, healthiest, most alive version of who we were created to be. But then if you move down a little bit, you can see this really messy collection of lines. And what this represents is that something happens to us as human beings, right? Attachment wounds within our family systems, trauma, catastrophic life events, death. Maybe we experienced somebody dying. Maybe we've been through a divorce, or maybe our parents went through a divorce. There's so many things that injure us as human beings. And so these injuries can be re-injured too. So these may be old wounds. Maybe somebody died in your family 20 years ago. Maybe somebody left or something tragic happened. But these same wounds can be kind of poked and triggered on a daily basis when somebody says something to you or when somebody does something to you. You feel that re-injury come back up. And what that injury does in our systems is it creates wounds. It creates a story. It creates a collection of thoughts and beliefs and feelings. And so if you kind of follow the map down to the very bottom, we see these emotions. And what we call these is the protected in ourselves. And so we call them the protected is because when something happens, we feel stuff, but we don't want to feel it. And so we try to get away from it the best we can. But what we cast down in our bodies is hurt, feeling needy, feeling lonely or insecure, feeling rejected, abandoned, sad, hopeless, worthless, maybe shame, maybe anxiety. And so we try our best to get away from the feelings that we feel, especially the painful ones. Maybe not so much, I'm fine, or I'm good, or I'm happy, or I'm glad. But we try really hard to get away from the painful experiences. So when we're wounded, these feelings come up, and if I'm honest with myself, I don't want to feel those feelings, right? I don't want to feel pain. I don't want to feel loss. I don't want to feel my grief. I don't want to feel lonely. And so what am I going to do naturally? I'm going to push it away. And so in a very brilliant way, our bodies are set up to be protected. So we find some really cool ways to not deal with our feelings that are really socially acceptable. And so these are the ways that we avoid our dragons. These are the ways that we, like Mrs. Bixby, clean the house and do as much as we can to stay away from the feelings. And so if you'll look with me, we've got the protectors over here on the left, which are, we call them managers. And these look like we're just kind of keeping an energy up top on the surface so that I don't have to feel the pain underneath. And so the way that we do this, striving, tasking, planning, organizing. I'm very guilty of that one. Caretaking, I'm good at that one too. Inner critic, spiritualizer, perfectionist, intellectualizer, being a people pleaser, or being overly responsible for people. And what it does is it diverts your attention away from feeling your feelings, from acknowledging your dragons. And then we have some that don't look as socially acceptable over here on the right. So these are called firefighters. And what these do is there are ways for us to, when a feeling rises up, we're going to put it out, just like a firefighter would a fire. So we've got escaping. And maybe you do this by checking your phone, checking your Netflix, or getting on your Netflix, checking your social media accounts. Maybe it's watching TV. Maybe it's sleeping. Maybe you avoid your pain by staying in your chair at home, being asleep. Maybe it's alcohol for you. Maybe it's shopping. That's fun. Let's go shopping. Distracting. Maybe let's go on a trip. Let's plan something. Let's get away. Fatigue. Then there's sarcasm, right? Like, who doesn't do sarcasm? I'm guilty of that too, but people find really good ways to avoid their pain by trying to be funny or trying to crack a joke or saying a sideways comment so that they don't have to say, I'm hurt, I'm angry, I'm lonely, really, because that'd be too awkward or too uncomfortable in a social setting, right? Maybe you experience body pain, maybe you get headaches, or maybe you have some sort of physical manifestation that keeps you from feeling your emotional pain. There's fantasizing. This is where pornography comes in, or any sort of daydreaming or ways to stay away from your pain. There's also binge eating. This is another way that we stay away from our pain. And we get really good. We get really, really good at staying away from our pain. And it's almost like I'm sure a lot of you reading these lists, it feels really familiar. And me too. Me too. We get really good at staying away from our dragons. So this book that I just read you, it's really awesome because it gives you this picture of like, there's a dragon, and then it grows because I avoided it. And the more I avoided it, the more it grows. And then it outgrew the house, right? And things just started getting bigger. But this is a children's book, so they may have had to put a happy ending in here. So what they did was, Billy patted his dragon on the head, and then the dragon went back down. And it didn't go away, but it went back down to a manageable size. But if we're realistic, there's probably an alternate ending to this book, right? In real life. In real life, the alternate ending could be the dragon continues to grow, and it starts to blow fire, and it starts to take over the town and eat Billy's mom. And there's lots of alternate endings, but yeah, the truth is, like, this is not where real life stops. And so if that were to happen in Billy's life, I imagine that Billy would start to get overwhelmed. And then his system would feel like it needed to shut down because it couldn't take how big the dragon had gotten. So if this were the case, this is what we call shutdown mode. And this is how I think of depression. So depression is shutdown mode. It's not only sadness. It's not only despair or grief or loneliness, but it's the collection of all the dragons that haven't been named and noticed. So when our dragons aren't being named and noticed, they grow, right? And then they outgrow our protection systems, right? So there's only so much Netflix can do. There's only so much drinking can do. There's only so much shopping can do. And then our dragon's bigger than what our protections can contain. And so our body shuts down. And so it's kind of like a computer that has been opened or has too many tabs open. I'm sure you guys have experienced that, especially like older computers. They have all these tabs open, and what happens is the computer gets really overwhelmed, and so it just like crashes. And so this is kind of how I think of depression. And I imagine that there are some of you sitting in this room that are really starting to feel connected to what I'm talking about. And so I wanted to give some words. I asked a couple of my clients this week what their experience of their depression was. And they said, dark. I can't see anything. They said, I feel like I'm in a pit. I feel like it's suffocating me, like I can't breathe, like I'm not myself. Like people look at me and they don't really know who I am, and I feel that way too. foggy, hopeless. And I know that some of you are sitting in here and this may actually be resonating. So I wanted to take a minute and kind of put my clinical hat on and kind of show you some markers of what to look for. Is depression really alive in your life or alive in somebody that you know's life? And so these are some markers of what depression looks like. So maybe there's a decreased mood. Maybe it's a flatness. That's what we call it in clinical language, a flat affect. And what this looks like is just a straight line. There's no happy, there's no sad, there's no angry. There's just this straight line of emotion. So there's no fluctuation in mood. Maybe a real lack of motivation. So the things that you would normally feel motivated to do, take out the trash, fix some dinner, those are some things that maybe you just really don't feel like you can do right now. Maybe there's apathy. Maybe you used to care about some things and now you don't care as much. Or maybe you're just not interested because you don't feel that fluctuation happening in your body. Maybe you have low energy and fatigue. Or isolation. Maybe you're staying away from the people that you used to connect to. You're starting to disengage. You're starting to put distance. You're like, maybe the story is they don't want me there. Maybe the story is it's not going to matter if I show up anyway. And so that kind of leads to avoidance. I'm just not going to go. I'm going to disengage from everybody. And this sometimes, right here, and I wasn't going to bring this up, but here I am. But this is sometimes where some suicidal thoughts come up. And so this is hard, and maybe we'll circle back to this at a later time. But maybe that's coming up. And then maybe, too, there's marked weight gain or marked weight loss. Maybe there's a loss of appetite or increased appetite. So this is the picture of what depression looks like. And some of you may actually be suffering with it, and some of you may not. But it doesn't matter because we're all suffering in this together. But in talking directly about depression, I want those of you that may be suffering to hear. Now, I'm just looking out right now because I'm seeing faces. I'm seeing people that may even have this in their life. And what I want you to hear is you did not choose this. It's not your fault. Something happened to you in your life, and this is your body's automatic way of surviving. So honestly, the way that this happens is when the body's overwhelmed, it goes into fight, flight, or freeze response. So this is our sympathetic nervous system engaging, and if old wounds are triggered, then it's going to create this response, and that's where depression lives. And so that's why I say it's not your fault. To those that know somebody, it's not their fault. They did not choose this. We cannot pray them out of it. They need somebody to meet them in this place. They need somebody to help wake them up from the pit, pull them out. And two, if you are in the pit, fight. Try your best to pull and ask for help. So I'm thinking about Billy's mom again. And Billy's mom, Billy had something. He had a dragon in the room. And Billy's mom just went around it and cleaned and stayed busy. And she avoided the dragon. And so I'm inviting all of us at this point. How do we start talking about our dragons, right? How do we start, instead of avoiding them, have some conversations about these? And so this is going to lead us to some practical steps on if you are suffering with depression or if you know somebody. These are some basic steps that you can take to start moving. Maybe it's just a tiny step, just the tiniest step to get you out of the pit. See a counselor. So counselors are trained in mental health issues, and in this place, they're not going to just meet you in your depression. They're going to meet you and want to dig down deep and pull up the root system of your depression. Maybe you have something biochemically off in your body, and that would fit for seeing a medical professional. Maybe something is off in your body, so go see a doctor. Also, there are some really basic needs, and if these things are off in any way, they can cause mood fluctuation. And so check your food intake. Maybe there's something that's not working in your body with food. Maybe you're getting too much. Maybe you're getting too little. Also, are you moving your body? Our bodies need movement. And so if the body is still, then it's not getting what it needs. And so that might be something to look into for you. And then your sleep patterns. Are you sleeping too much? Are you sleeping too little? These are just some questions to start asking yourself. And then we have on here externalizing your pain. So this is an invitation to start pouring out. So what Billy did in the sweetest little moment is he just acknowledged his dragon. He just reached over and patted his dragon. And in patting his dragon, he named it, he acknowledged it, and his dragon started to go back down. And I think that's all that our dragons really need, is they need a little bit of attention. And so I put externalizing on here as a way of getting some of this out of your body. And the ways that I always recommend to do that are start a journal, start writing and pouring out and getting some of your feelings out onto paper. If you don't, sometimes it's not safe to talk to people. And so that's a really great place to start. Walking, just moving your body a little bit can start to let go of some of the pain. Start talking to somebody. Maybe it is a counselor. Maybe it's a really safe person that you trust. There's creativity in this place too. Maybe you're really creative. Maybe you want to draw or paint or get crafty. But there's some ways to start moving your pain in that way too. Another one, we have access to some really great community groups here. So maybe even getting involved in a community and letting yourself be seen and known so that you don't have to carry this by yourself. Maybe you haven't been to church in a while and you need to connect, but you feel like this place is going to be maybe judgmental. But I think it's worth the risk to let yourself be known. And then another thing that I like to put on here is Dan Siegel is the leading researcher of attachment wounds and healing attachment wounds. And so he has this really quirky little quote, and it says, "You have to name it to tame it," which goes really great with our dragon theme here, because as our dragons start to grow, if they're not being named, then they're continuing to grow, right? And they're not being tamed. And so this is the invitation right here to this group of people, is that right here in this room, if you look to your left and to your right, there's someone next to you that is likely carrying a dragon, similar to yours or like yours. And if we think about our culture does not allow us to talk about hard things. It says, that's awkward, or that's uncomfortable, or they're going to judge me for that, or it's going to be too painful. But this is like a tiny little collection of people in comparison to the world. And just think what we could do if we could make space for talking about our dragons. And so maybe it starts in your marriage. Maybe it starts with you and your children. Then maybe it grows to your community group. And you start saying, hey, I felt sadness today. I felt grief today. I felt despair today. I felt lonely today. And so how do we start having those conversations right here in this place? Because if we can do it here, then we can start to change the world and the way the world views dragons. And then our dragons can be manageable. So I want to take a minute and go back to Psalm 69. And this first verse moves me so much because you can see David's overwhelm in it. Verse 1. Save me, O God. The waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire. where there is no foothold. And you see in this scripture right here that David's overwhelmed. This could be depression right here. This could be the pit that even my clients were referring to earlier. And if you look on in the chapter, there's so many verses where David is feeling and he's pouring out. And if you maybe look at verse 3. I am weary with my crying out. My throat is parched, my eyes grow dim. David is hurt. He's needy. He's longing here. Verse 5. Oh God, you know my folly. The wrongs I have done are not hidden from you. This is guilt. Verse 7. Dishonor has covered my face. This is shame. Verse 8. I have become a stranger to my brothers, an alien to my mother's sons. He's feeling rejected and abandoned. In verse 10, when I wept, this is sadness. Verse 12, I'm the talk of those who sit at the gate, and the drunkards make songs about me. This is hurt and sadness. Verse 20, reproaches have broken my heart, so that I am in despair. This is hopelessness. And so clearly, as we unpack David's emotions in Psalm 69, we see that this is real, and this is as old as time. And David was onto something here, it feels like to me. He knew he had to get it out. He knew he had to start talking about it. So we have these great collection of Psalms where he's pouring out emotion, raw emotion. And so he was on to something that I can't hold this by myself. And it's really cool to think this was so long ago, and we're still, the people that come into my office on a weekly basis, it's so real, and it's still going on. And so this is the human experience. This is, as long as we are on this earth, we're going to have suffering and pain and despair. And we can choose to run from these feelings, or we can start to name them and talk about them and choose to not be alone in them. And we can start here. We can start right here and not be like Billy's mom. If you go on in Psalm 69, verse 29, David says, but I am afflicted and I'm in pain. Let your salvation, O God, set me on high. He's ready at this point, like he's hurting. And he's crying out to the Lord, like, save me. But he goes on to say, I will praise the name of God with a song. I will magnify him with thanksgiving. So David, he knew there was something more. He knew that I'm going to suffer, but I don't have to hold this by myself. So I start pouring it out. And the coolest part, I will praise the name of God with a song, even in my pain. Pain equals worship. Turning our pain into worship is what David did. Jesus said in John 16:33, one of my favorite verses of all time, in me, I said these things, that in me you may have peace. In this world, you will have tribulation. You will have trouble. You will have pain and suffering and sorrow and anguish and all the things that hurt. But he said, but take heart, for I've overcome the world. And when I hear that, all I can think about is just how big God is. He's bigger than we could ever imagine. He's bigger than our depression. He's bigger than our dragons. He's bigger than our hurt, than our pain, than our sorrow, than our loneliness. He can hold it, and we don't have to by ourselves. So we've got this song, and it's called You're Bigger Than I Thought You Were. And it felt so appropriate because sometimes it feels like depression is so big. It feels unmanageable and unwieldy, and it feels scary in our families, and it hurts. But the coolest part is that we get to declare over our hurts and over our depression and over all the dragons that we carry that He's bigger than we could ever imagine, and He can hold them with us. So declare this song with me over your pain, over your despair, over your loved ones, over your depression. Declare this song and let's worship together.